Well, myself and Mary would love to thank you for coming along today, and hopefully we'll enjoy each other's company today. With new investigation, it's very hard for it to enter our life because many times we are already blocked to receiving it before we even begin. That has to change. If we are going to grow forever, if we are going to always continue growing in our soul, we need to allow ourselves to be humble to new things. We need to allow ourselves to be able to conceive that many of the beliefs that we have are very, very different to the truth. And being humble allows us to see that. Now, is there any questions about humility before I go on with the next essential thing? No? Everyone's fine with humility. You're all very humble. No? Try to. An interesting thing about humility is that we often think we're being humble, but years later we realise that we weren't in that particular thing, whatever it was that we were looking at. And sometimes, I don't know about you in your life, but sometimes things get presented to us many times before we're humble. Have you noticed that? Like the same thing comes up again, the same thing comes up again, the same thing comes up. If the same thing is happening over and over again in our life, then it's a very good indication we're not humble enough yet. Because when you're humble, things change, things start changing. Right? And true humility allows for change. But if the same thing is happening, so for example, in our lives, for some of us, it might be we were married when we were young, and then we got divorced in our late 20s, and then we married another person, and wow, they almost seem like they were the first person in a different body. Right? Now that's an indication that we're not humble. Does that make sense? That we haven't learned something that we need to learn. So that's humility. Humility. Quality of humility is essential. The next quality that's very important that we need to learn to have a love of is truth. Now, I'm not speaking here of your own ideas that you think are truth. I mean two types of truth that we need to be humble to. So let's look at both of them. So, one type of truth that we need to be humble to is universal truth. I also call this God's truth, or if you want another term, absolute truth. Now, I know many people on earth don't really believe in absolute truth. They feel that there are so many different ideas and there's so many different truths, and it's up to the individual to select which one they want to accept. Now, I don't agree with that philosophy myself. I feel that if there is a God, an entity that created us, then it would make sense that that entity would know all truth. And if that entity knows all truth, then all we need to do is somehow connect to that entity, and we will start to receive truth from that entity. Now, because most people on earth don't connect to that entity, most people on earth are very self-reliant rather than God-reliant, then of course they have to determine truth using a process of experimentation and what I would call the creation of experiments is what I would call a very slow way of discovering truth. So for example, if you're a scientist and you want to come up with a new form of technology, let's say it's a cure for cancer. What they do is they investigate the disease, then they come up with theories which they need to attempt to prove, in other words, through medical processes. So what they do is they come up with a theory as to what might cure the cancer, and then what they try to do is create another, usually many times for many other diseases, it's been another virus or another living organism that will attack the cancer and therefore destroy it. And they come up with these theories, and then they've got to create something that will test the theory, and then they've got to test the theory on a mice or a rat, and eventually maybe something a bit more closer to a human like a pig or something like that, and then eventually they get to do trials on humans, and then eventually we have a cure. Now, for many diseases that's been 50 years of time that goes on for. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel that's a very slow way of creating something that cures something else. It's a very slow way. If we found out everything about the cancer in terms of what's truly happening, what's really occurring, we would know fairly instantly what the cure is, if we knew everything about it. And we have scientists now, for instance, with cancer, still investigating what causes it. Because it is unknown generally in the scientific community. We know that certain cells eat other cells, and there is some reason why that occurs, but we don't know the reason of why that starts in some people and not other people. And once we know all of that, once we know all of those reasons, then it would be a lot easier to come up with a cure. But unfortunately, we have to investigate all of those things. Now, to me, God already knows what the cure of cancer is. Being the creator of us, God would know why cancer would even come into existence. So therefore, if I could somehow connect to absolute truth, I could find the answer to that question as to what the cure is very, very rapidly. But the majority of us don't think that way, and so we would prefer this other way of investigation. Right? Now, I feel there is such a thing as absolute truth. I don't know what you feel, maybe we can discuss this a little. There is such a thing, in my opinion, as universal truth, and if we're humble, we will be open to receiving that idea as a potential idea. Yeah? But if we're closed, we won't be humble to receiving that idea. Yeah? Truth number 2 that we need to be open to. What do you reckon it might be? Now, none of you have already heard some of this, can answer.
Personal truth?
Personal truth. What do we mean by personal truth? Well, what I mean by it is not what we'd like to believe ourselves to be, but rather how we truly are from this person's perspective, from God's perspective. That's what I would call personal truth. So, in other words, some of us would like to believe we're very friendly people. But you know, on a Friday night after you've been working the entire week and you've been kept late at work for another hour because the boss asked you to when really you wanted to go home, and now you're hungry and you're driving home and you're thinking, I will get my favourite pizza, let's say. You pull into the shop where the favourite pizza is normally delivered and they've closed. What are you feeling now? Now there's a feeling of annoyance, a bit of frustration and so forth coming in, right? Now we're not so polite, generally. Even if we're polite outwardly, often we're not polite inside of ourselves in terms of our true feelings. We feel some degree of frustration, some annoyance and other emotions. You then go home, so you're now without the meal, you go home and your wife's home and she's been home all day and she's gone swimming and she's been relaxing at the solarium and doing another of other things, and there's no dinner. What do we feel now? Now obviously there'll be a whole other set of emotions coming up there. If I'm not humble, I'll start blaming my wife, getting upset with her for not preparing the meal. Why she didn't realise that I'm at work all day, it's been a long day, long week, and we start to have some emotions towards her as well. Now, those emotions that come up in the times when you're tired, when you're frustrated and annoyed, are oftentimes what's really within us. They are sitting there dormant most of the time, and yet we deny their existence most of the time. And it's only when we get uncomfortable that we start feeling them. Do you notice that? It's just when you feel discomfort that you start feeling those emotions. Now, I would call those emotions still a part of your personal truth. There are things inside of you that are beautiful, and at the same time, because of the way we've grown up with a lot of different emotional injuries and so forth from our parents and our environment, there are also things inside of us that can be quite ugly at times. That's why people can murder, and that's why people can rape, because they have things inside of them that are quite ugly, in terms of emotionally ugly, that they connect to at times, and then they express. And that's a part of the personal truth as well. What we are really. In England, I don't know if you guys know the Beatles well, do you? Well, in England, of course they know the Beatles well. So. And I just reminded them in England about the song, the Eleanor Rigby song. You know that song? No. That the lady wears a face that she keeps in a jar by the door. Yeah? And many of us do that, right? We go inside, we take off our clothes, take off our face, right? And we act differently at home. And then before we go out the door, put on the face. And sometimes for many of the ladies, you might actually put on a face too, like makeup and so forth, and go outside again and act differently outside. Then come home, act differently when you're home to outside. That's not being in personal truth. Right? Personal truth is, if you can love personal truth, you can actually see yourself as you truly are. And this is a very powerful tool that you have at your disposal. You see, if you do not see yourself as you truly are, it's impossible to change. But if you can see yourself as you truly are, you have the ability to change. So it's a very powerful tool at your disposal, this idea of seeing personal truth, seeing yourself as you really are. Now, with truth, I feel there's these two parts of truth. This truth and this truth combined together is what will allow you to grow. But if you try to accept this truth without doing anything about this truth, you will grow for a little bit and then you will become stagnant. You will no longer grow. Or if you try to accept this without accepting this, you will grow for a little bit and also then become stagnant because you're not conforming to the universal truth. There has to be a merging of these truths where eventually I know the truth, the universal truth, and inside of me it's automatic for me to practice it, to use it in my life. Now, there are qualities of universal truth, and I do believe that one of the qualities of universal truth is that it's infinite. So therefore we'll always be discovering it. There will always be new discoveries. Nobody can say, here's a book, like with the Bible, for example. Many religious people say, here's a book, and all the truth is in that. Now that's physically impossible, isn't it? If the truth is infinite, this is not infinite. It's physically impossible for all the truth to be in this. Does that make sense?
Of course.
However, it's possible that some of the truth is in this, isn't it? Just like some of the truth could be in other holy books, for example, that have been created around the planet. Exactly the same principle. Because this is a finite book, it's only possible to have a finite amount of truth, literally. Now, if we think of universal truth as infinite, and we think of our truth as we're constantly learning about the universal truth, then you can see that we have to learn to grow and stretch and change. Because a person who's physically limited cannot absorb infinite truth. We need to grow so that we become bigger in the soul. And we'll talk about how that actually happens later. There has to be a way for it to happen. Otherwise we can't absorb infinite truth. Right? But these two things are essential if you want to grow and change in your life all the time. And to me, they are essential for what I would call true spirituality, true development at the soul level. It can only occur with these two particular qualities happening. In fact, I see humility as the doorway into truth. So if I'm not completely humble, I have no way of absorbing new truth. So I am closed to new truth. I'm basically saying no to new truth. If I'm not humble, I am rejecting the possibility of new truth, which is a very, I feel, stupid thing to do. Because if you do that, you're limiting yourself to your current development. You can't change if you do that. But if I become open, humble, then it's like opening a doorway to be able to receive more truth. I now have the ability to absorb new things that I could not absorb before. And this is a very powerful way of changing. If I can't do that, I can't change. Yeah? So truth is also, I feel, a doorway into the third quality. Now, I think many of you could probably guess what that would be. Love.